Welcome back. Believe it or not, we're going to have one more tool for our toolbox in solving quadratic equations. We've got the quadratic formula this time. We're going to learn two things. One is how to use the quadratic formula, and the second thing is we're going to use part of the quadratic formula called the discriminant to help us determine the number of solutions there are to each quadratic equation. So the first thing we need to do is look back at our parent function. Remember, was f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c, and making that into a quadratic equation, this is what it would look like. And now I've got this extra tool, the quadratic formula, that will I can use to solve any quadratic equation. Remember, I've got graphing and I've got using square roots, I've got factoring, but I can also use this quadratic formula no matter what my numbers are. Here is the quadratic formula. If you catch me in class, I might sing you the quadratic formula tune, but you will have this on your formula chart, so you don't need to memorize it, but it is useful. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, and we're just going to plug in each of those numbers. So let's go through an example. So notice I've got my quadratic formula. Remember, you can find it on our charts. So all I'm going to do is plug in my values. For A, my value is 4. For B, I've got a value of 3. And C, I've got a value of negative 10. And I'm going to take those values and plug them into my quadratic formula. So I've got x equals negative b, and my b is 3, so negative 3. And notice I've got plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 3 squared, or 9, minus 4 times the value for a, which is 4, times the value of c, which was negative 10. All over 2 times the value of a, which is 4. So starting to simplify this, I've got x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9. And I've got 4 times 4 is 16 times negative 10, negative 160, except I'm subtracting negative 160. So adding 160 all over 2 times 4, or 8. So I've got x equals negative 3 plus or minus, this is the square root of 169, which is 13 over 8. So I've got two values for x. I've got x equals negative 3 plus 13, or positive 10 over 8. 10 over 8 will simplify to 5/4. Or I've got negative 3 minus 13, which is negative 16 over 8, which will simplify to negative 2. So my values for x are 5/4 or negative 2. Those are my zeros, or solutions to my quadratic equation that I have right up there. Let's give that another whirl. Here's your formula. I'm going to ask that you plug in all of your numbers and check and see if you can do this by pausing the video and come back and check your answers. Okay, so hopefully you came up with your two solutions, which would be 5 and negative 3. Remember, we needed to put this back into standard form by moving this 15 to the other side. We had our values for A, B, and C, and then I just plugged into this formula over here. And once I plugged in, I came up with my square root. In one case, I added the square root of 64, and the second instance, I subtracted the square root of 64. So let's try an example, though, where we don't necessarily have a nice perfect number. And in this case, I am going to have you use your calculator or make an estimation as to what that'll be. So, all right, here goes. The quadratic formula, x equals negative b, so that's going to be my 3, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is going to be my 9, negative 3 squared, minus 4a, which which is 1, c negative 5, all over 2a, and my a is 1, so 2 times 1. So it obviously goes to pop goes the weasel, but it helps me to remember where it goes where. So I've got x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus 20, or 29, which notice is not going to be pretty, over 2. So I've got x equals 3 plus, and I'm going to estimate square root of 29 at 5.4. So I'm going to go with 3 plus 5.4 over 2, and that's going to give me approximately 4.2. Or I've got x equals 3 minus 5.4, because I've got it plus or minus all over 2, and that's going to give me a value of approximately negative 1.2. So remember, I told you that there was one other thing that I wanted you to get out of this, and that is determining the number of solutions based on our discriminant. Okay, so we're going to use the discriminant, and this is a word you need to know, so make sure this is in your notes. The discriminant is that part of the quadratic formula that is underneath the square root sign. So it's this. The discriminant is the b squared minus 4ac part of your quadratic formula. And we're going to be able to predict how many solutions there are based on the answer, what the value is for that discriminant. So if b squared minus 4ac equals 0, then I just have one solution, and that solution is x equals negative b over 2a. Think about it. I've got x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So if I get rid of this, if this is equal to 0, then I only have x equals negative b over 2a. There is no plus or minus, so I only have one solution. So when my discriminant equals 0, I have exactly one solution. Okay, make sure you write that down. I have exactly one solution when my discriminant equals 0. But there are two other scenarios. So if the discriminant equals 0, I know I have one solution. If the discriminant ends up being a positive number, so b squared minus 4a, b squared minus 4ac is a positive number, then I've got two solutions, because I can add this number or I can subtract this number, which is going to give me two different values. Go back and look at the problems we just worked through. But if I have a negative number for my discriminant, if my b squared minus 4ac, remember this is under a square root sign, b squared minus 4ac, if this number ends up being negative, that's going to give me a negative, whatever number that might be, 49. I have no real solutions, okay? No real solutions. So I have three scenarios, and I can determine from the discriminant how many solutions are possible. So let's try to figure some out. I just need to know how many solutions there are. You don't need to tell me what they are. So I've got this equation, and I want to know how many solutions there are. Well, I'm going to figure out what the discriminant is, and the discriminant, remember, is b squared minus 4ac. That's just that part under the radical sign. B squared is going to be 25 minus 4 times negative 1 times c. So I've got 25 plus 8. So whatever that number is, it is positive. So since I have a positive value for my discriminant, I have two solutions to my equation. Got another scenario here. My discriminant of b squared minus 4ac is going to be negative 1 squared, or 1, minus 4 times 2 times 7. So I've got 1 minus 28, 56. So I've got a negative number here. So that means that if I've got a negative sign under my radical, I have no real real solutions. And my last example here, and I bet you can predict it, but let's go through the exercise. B squared minus 4AC, I've got B squared of 144 minus 4 times A, which was 4, times C, which is 9. So I've got 144 minus 144, which is 0. So remember, if my discriminant is 0, then my answer is I have one solution, because that's just going to be negative b over 2a. Okay, so let's try a real-world example. Yay! I've got a weight that is 2 feet above the ground, and I'm going to see if I can hit it with a velocity of 30 feet per second and try to see if it'll reach this bell, which is 25 feet up the pole. I'm going to give you this formula, and this will start looking familiar, but I've got h equals negative 16, and remember t is time, t squared, plus, I said my velocity was 30, so I've got plus 30t. And I'm starting from a height of 2 feet, so I'm at plus 2. And I want to know if it'll hit the bell of a 25-foot pole. So I'm going to set that equal to 25 to see if it'll work. Plus 30t plus 2 equals 25. Will it get there? Well, I'm going to solve like I did before. Negative 16t squared plus 30t. I need to move that 25 over, so I'm at minus 23 equals 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to see if my discriminant will yield me an answer. So my discriminant, remember, is b squared minus 4ac. So let's plug in my values. B squared is 900 minus 4 times negative 16 times c is negative 23. Well, if you notice, I'm going to have 900 minus 1472 is what this equals. So I'm going to have a negative number under my radical. My discriminant is negative, therefore I have no real solutions. So I cannot hit the bell if I'm only putting 30 feet per second of force on that with my mallet to ring the bell. So try out some of these problems and bring these into class on Monday. But your joke for today, and I'm actually going to make fun of myself, I guess, there are 3 types of mathematicians: those who can count and those who can't. Ponder that for a moment, and I'll see you on Monday. Have a great weekend.